In the gilded cage of the Hawthorne estate, a powerful CEO's aggressive, untouchable son, Max, meets his match in Eleanor Vance, a kind and highly perceptive black woman hired as his caregiver. She faces down his calculated mischief and rage not with punishment, but with an unwavering commitment to empathy, reframing his destruction as misdirected genius. This is the compelling story of how one woman's dedication fundamentally restructures a child's character, transforming the chaotic heir into a poised, successful young man, and forging a lifelong familial bond rooted in respect and profound gratitude. If you liked the video and have subscribed to my channel, let's move on to our story. Enjoy watching. The grand mahogany door of the Hawthorne estate, a monolith of old money and imposing architecture, swung open to reveal Eleanor Vance, a woman whose calm demeanor and gentle smile belied the steel in her spine. She stood on the threshold, a stark contrast to the opulence behind her, holding a modest yet sturdy travel bag. Her dark skin glowed softly in the late afternoon sun, a testament to her vibrant spirit, and her eyes, deep pools of intelligence and warmth, scanned the vast marble foyer. This was it. Her new beginning and, unbeknownst to her, the beginning of a profound journey. A tall, impeccably dressed man, Mr. Henderson, the estate's long-serving majordomo, greeted her with a polite, if somewhat weary, nod. "Miss Vance, welcome. Mr. Hawthorne is currently on a conference call, but he extends his apologies. I trust your journey was comfortable?" His voice was smooth, cultured, but Eleanor detected a subtle undertone of something. Resignation? Foreboding? She couldn't quite place it. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson, it was quite pleasant," Eleanor replied, her voice a soothing alto, a stark contrast to the echoing silence of the mansion. She'd spent her life in bustling, vibrant communities, where the air hummed with conversation and laughter. This grand silence felt almost oppressive. "Excellent. If you'll follow me, I'll show you to your quarters and then to Master Max's wing," Henderson stated, already turning, his polished shoes clicking rhythmically on the marble. Eleanor followed, taking in the surroundings. Paintings by masters adorned the walls, sculptures of various eras stood sentinel in alcoves, and antique furniture, polished to a mirror sheen, filled the vast spaces. It was a museum, not a home. Her quarters were spacious and elegantly furnished, overlooking a manicured rose garden. It was far more luxurious than anything she'd ever lived in, yet it felt impersonal. She quickly unpacked the few items she'd brought, a worn copy of her favorite poetry, a framed photo of her late grandmother, and a small hand-knitted shawl. These were the anchors to her past, the comfort in her present, and the hope for her future. After a brief moment to freshen up, Henderson reappeared. "If you're ready, Miss Vance, Master Max awaits." The way he said "awaits" made it sound less like a pleasant anticipation and more like a pending confrontation. Eleanor felt a flicker of unease, but she squared her shoulders. She had faced challenging children before. She was a professional, a caregiver who had dedicated her life to nurturing young minds. They ascended a sweeping staircase, then navigated a labyrinthine corridor that led to a more modern, brightly lit wing of the house. The decor here was different. Less antique, more contemporary, but still incredibly expensive. Henderson paused before a heavy, oak door, taking a deep breath. "Master Max is spirited, Miss Vance. He has had difficulty with previous nannies." Eleanor's unease solidified. "How many previous nannies, Mr. Henderson?" she asked gently, her gaze steady. He hesitated, then sighed. "In the past year alone? 5.5 tutors. He has a habit of testing boundaries. 5 nannies in a year. That was more than spirited. That was a distress signal." Eleanor felt a surge of empathy for the unseen boy. A child who pushed away that many caregivers was a child in pain, crying out for something he wasn't getting. "I understand," Eleanor said, her voice firm, leaving no room for doubt. "I'm here to help him." Henderson nodded, a hint of something akin to relief flickering in his eyes. He knocked, then pushed the door open, revealing a scene of utter chaos. The room was enormous, clearly designed as a child's dream play space, but it looked like a tornado had ripped through it. Toys were strewn everywhere, a remote control helicopter lay in pieces near a smashed glass vase, building blocks were scattered like shrapnel, and a vibrant painting, clearly meant for a canvas, was instead smeared across one wall. In the center of this maelstrom sat a boy, no older than 10, with a shock of unruly brown hair and eyes that blazed with a fierce, untamed energy. This was Maxwell Hawthorne, heir to the Hawthorne Empire, and the source of the mansion's disquiet. He was currently dismantling a complex-looking robot, pliers in hand, a look of intense concentration bordering on malice on his face. He glanced up as they entered, his gaze sharp, assessing and utterly devoid of warmth. "This is Miss Vance, Master Max," Henderson announced, his voice a little strained. "She will be your new caregiver." Max didn't speak. He simply stared, his eyes narrowed, a mischievous glint dancing in their depths. Eleanor met his gaze not with anger or fear, but with a quiet, unwavering resolve. She saw the challenge in his eyes, the defiance, but also, underneath it all, a flicker of something raw and vulnerable. "Hello, Max," Eleanor said, her voice soft yet clear. She didn't scold him for the mess, didn't react to the broken robot, didn't even flinch at his intense stare. She simply offered a genuine smile, the kind that reached her eyes. "It's a pleasure to meet you." Max, clearly unnerved by her lack of reaction, finally spoke, his voice surprisingly deep for his age, laced with a cynical edge. "Another one? Don't bother unpacking your bags. You won't last." He emphasized the last two words, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. Henderson shifted uncomfortably. Eleanor, however, remained unfazed. "We'll see about that, Max," she said, her smile broadening slightly. "In the meantime, how about we start by clearing some of this up? It looks like a very creative endeavor, but I suspect some of these pieces might be easier to reassemble if they weren't quite so scattered." She gestured around the room, not with judgment, but with an invitation to collaboration. Max scoffed, returning to his robot demolition. "I'm not cleaning anything. That's what you're for." Eleanor walked further into the room, stepping carefully over the debris. She picked up a stray building block, examining its intricate design. "Well, I'm here to help you, Max. And helping you means creating an environment where you can learn and grow. That includes a tidy space." She picked up another block, then another, beginning to stack them neatly in a corner. She didn't demand, didn't order, didn't even directly ask for his help. She simply started. Henderson, witnessing this unexpected tactic, cleared his throat. "I'll leave you two to it then, Miss Vance. I'll inform Mr. Hawthorne of your arrival." He practically scurried out, leaving Eleanor alone with the formidable 10-year-old. Max watched her, his expression a mixture of surprise and suspicion. He was used to nannies who would immediately start barking orders or worse, cowering in fear. Eleanor was doing neither. She was just calmly, methodically tidying. "What are you doing?" he finally demanded, his voice laced with annoyance. "As I said, I'm tidying," Eleanor replied, not looking up, but her tone was gentle. "A clean space often helps a clear mind. And I imagine you have a very clear, very inventive mind, Max." That last comment seemed to momentarily disarm him. He paused his assault on the robot. "My mind is fine," he grumbled, though a flicker of something, perhaps a nascent curiosity, entered his eyes. Eleanor finally looked at him, her smile still present. "I'm sure it is. And I'm sure it can do even more amazing things when it's not overwhelmed by clutter." She picked up a remote control car, one of its wheels snapped off. "This looks like it was quite fast. What happened to it?" Max hesitated. "It crashed," he said, a hint of defensiveness in his voice. "I was trying to make it jump over the sofa, but the ramp wasn't steep enough." "Ah, an engineering challenge," Eleanor mused, examining the broken wheel. "Sometimes, a simple repair can be just as satisfying as building something new. Do you have a toolbox?" Max stared at her, genuinely surprised. No one had ever approached his destructive tendencies as engineering challenges before. They had always just seen the mess, the broken items, the naughtiness. "Yeah, it's over there," he muttered, pointing to a large, disorganized bin in the corner. Eleanor retrieved the bin. It was a jumble of tools, wires, and spare parts. She calmly began to sort through it. "You know, my grandmother used to say that every problem has a solution. You just have to be patient enough to find it. And sometimes the solution requires a steady hand and a keen eye." She found a small screwdriver, then a tiny wrench. She didn't immediately offer to fix the car herself. Instead, she laid out the tools neatly on a clear patch of floor. "What do you think is the best way to reattach this wheel, Max? What kind of screws do you think it needs?" Max, despite himself, was drawn in. He watched her, then hesitantly crawled closer, observing her organized approach. He picked up the broken wheel, turning it over in his small hands. "It needs a small Phillips head, I think," he said, his voice softer now, less aggressive. "That sounds like a good starting point," Eleanor affirmed, handing him the appropriate screwdriver. She didn't take over. She offered guidance, a gentle nudge, but she let him lead. Slowly, painstakingly, they began to tackle the room. Eleanor continued to tidy, offering comments not on the mess itself, but on the potential for organization and the joy of a functional space. She spoke about the stories she imagined his toys could tell, the adventures they could embark on if they weren't scattered. Max, for his part, found himself drawn into the task of repairing the car, occasionally offering a reluctant suggestion or even, on one occasion, picking up a stray block and placing it in a designated bin. Hours passed. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the now considerably tidier room. The remote control car, while not fully functional, had its wheel reattached, a small victory. Max, exhausted from the unaccustomed mental and physical effort, sat amidst the still present, but now manageable chaos, a strange look on his face. He hadn't broken anything else. He hadn't thrown a tantrum. He hadn't even tried to scare Eleanor away. Eleanor, sensing a shift, stood up, stretching her back. "Well, Max, that was quite a productive afternoon. You have a real knack for understanding how things work and for fixing them. Perhaps you're an engineer in the making." Max looked at her, his usual defiance momentarily replaced by a flicker of pride. "I guess," he mumbled almost shyly. "And now," Eleanor continued, her smile unwavering, "I imagine you must be quite hungry. How about we go down to dinner? Or perhaps you'd prefer a quiet meal up here tonight after all your hard work?" Max pondered this. Dinner with his father was often a silent, strained affair. The idea of a quiet meal with Eleanor seemed strangely appealing. "Up here?" he said, surprising even himself. Eleanor nodded. "Wonderful. I'll just go speak with the kitchen staff. And perhaps tomorrow we can work on creating a proper space for all your amazing creations." As Eleanor left the room, Max found himself in a state of unfamiliar quiet. The silence of the mansion still felt vast, but now, it wasn't quite as empty. He looked at the repaired wheel of the car, then at the neat stack of blocks, then at the still discarded pieces of the robot. A tiny, almost imperceptible seed of something new had been planted in the whirlwind that was Max. And Eleanor Vance, with her quiet strength and unwavering kindness, had been the one to plant it. He still planned to test her, of course. But perhaps, just perhaps, she might be different. This thought, startling in its novelty, was the last one he had before drifting off into a restless sleep, a single challenging thought echoing in his young mind: she won't last. But for the first time he wasn't entirely sure he believed it himself. Max woke the following morning with a purpose. The previous afternoon's unexpected truce with Miss Vance, the joint effort to repair a broken toy and the unusual feeling of pride he'd experienced, only served to deepen his suspicion. He was not used to peace, nor was he comfortable with it. Every adult who had entered his life had either tried to impose rigid order with an iron fist, or they had crumbled under his aggressive mischief. Eleanor Vance, with her gentle smiles and uncanny ability to turn his destruction into an engineering challenge, was an anomaly, and anomalies in Max's world were to be exploited and ultimately expelled. He needed to find her breaking point, the chink in her seemingly impenetrable armor of unwavering kindness. He began his day by setting a simple trap. Knowing she would likely try to prepare him for the morning routine, he rigged his bedroom door. A fishing line, scavenged from the attic during one of his unauthorized explorations, was tied tautly across the frame, just low enough to trip an unwary adult. Above it, balanced precariously on the door's ledge, was a plastic bucket filled with water, meticulously positioned to drench the clumsy intruder. It was a classic, if juvenile, prank, but usually highly effective in eliciting a shriek and a subsequent storm of disciplinary threats. Eleanor, however, had spent years observing children, and her intuition was finely tuned. As she approached Max's door, she noticed the faintest glimmer of the fishing line reflecting the hallway light. More importantly, she felt the silence behind the door, a silence too deliberate for a 10-year-old. She paused, her hand hovering over the knob. Instead of barging in, she knelt slowly, examining the trap with the curiosity of an archaeologist studying a new find. She didn't react with anger or even irritation. Instead, she let out a soft, appreciative chuckle. "Oh, Max," she murmured to herself, "you certainly have a talent for mechanics." She carefully slid her bag under the fishing line, lifted the bucket of water, and placed it safely on the floor. Then she opened the door. Max, nestled under his covers, feigning sleep, watched through one squinted eye, ready for the explosive confrontation. Eleanor walked over to his bed, her face radiating a quiet amusement. "Good morning, Max. That was a truly excellent bit of rigging. The tension on that line was perfect. But next time you decide to set up a tripwire, make sure you use a matte finish line. The reflection is a dead giveaway." She winked, completely undermining the seriousness of the offense. "Also, water is a little unimaginative, don't you think? You're capable of more creative substances." Max bolted upright, his feigned sleep shattered, his aggressive energy instantly rekindled. He was bewildered. She hadn't yelled, hadn't threatened to call his father, hadn't even mentioned the potential damage to the expensive Persian rug. You saw it?" he stammered. "I did," Eleanor confirmed, sitting gently on the edge of the bed. "It was very clever. A lot of thought went into it. But it also tells me you're focused on pushing me out instead of seeing what we could build together. That's a waste of your valuable thinking time." She ran a soothing hand over his messy hair. It was a simple maternal gesture, completely unexpected, and Max instinctively recoiled, but not before he felt the warmth of her touch. The second test came at breakfast. Max, emboldened by her failure to punish him, decided to escalate. He knew Mr. Henderson was meticulous about the presentation of the table. Max waited until Eleanor was momentarily distracted by a text message from Mr. Hawthorne regarding his schedule. In one swift, practiced motion, Max dumped a generous amount of syrup onto her chair. It was a sticky, childish, but undeniably nasty trick. When Eleanor returned, she calmly noticed the syrup. The small, sickly sweet puddle was impossible to miss. She looked down at the mess, then up at Max, who was watching her with glittering, expectant eyes, daring her to lose her composure. Instead of exploding, she simply shook her head and sighed, a sound of gentle disappointment, not anger. "Oh, Max, that's not only a mess for the cleaning staff to deal with, but it's wasteful. That's perfectly good maple syrup." She walked over to the sideboard, retrieved a clean linen napkin, and began to painstakingly blot the syrup from the chair. "You know," she said, her voice still calm, "when my grandmother was a girl, syrup was a rare treat. A friend of hers once wasted a whole jar trying to play a silly trick, and they had to go without it for a year. Not because of a punishment, but because they couldn't afford to waste a single drop." She didn't preach or scold, she simply provided a different perspective, grounding his petty destruction in a world he didn't know, a world where resources were precious. Max felt a hot flush creep up his neck. Her response was disarming. She wasn't angry at him, but genuinely disappointed by the waste. It was an emotional response he couldn't manipulate. He had anticipated a fight, but she was giving him a lesson in value and scarcity instead. He mumbled a non-committal apology, which she accepted with a simple nod and a genuine smile. "Thank you, Max. That means a lot. Now, are you ready for your pancakes? I saw the cook made them just the way you like them." The tests continued throughout the day, each one more aggressive than the last. In his private tutoring session, he defaced her textbook, scribbling a ridiculous caricature of her face on the first page. Eleanor didn't erase it. She simply studied it for a moment, then looked at him. "You're a good artist, Max. You have a real eye for capturing expression. But this book is a tool, not a canvas. Let's find you a real sketchbook. We can work on shading and proportion later, but for now, let's focus on this chapter on the American Revolution. Did you know the Founding Fathers were once rebels, too? They hated rules just like you do, but they learned that to truly achieve what they wanted, they had to be clever and strategic, not just messy." She had reframed his act of vandalism as raw artistic talent, simultaneously validating his skill while redirecting his energy. Later, he purposefully misled her during an afternoon walk on the estate grounds, sending her down a winding, overgrown path he knew ended abruptly at a thorny hedge. When she realized his prank, she simply stopped, turned, and waited for him to catch up, her arms crossed, not in anger but in patient expectation. "A dead end, Max," she stated simply. I thought it was a shortcut." He lied, avoiding her eyes. Eleanor didn't call him a liar. She didn't even correct him. She simply looked at the thorny hedge, then back at him. A shortcut that leads to a painful, prickly barrier. Life has many of those, Max. Sometimes the straight path is best. But even when we take a detour, we don't panic. We simply turn around and find the right way together. She offered him her hand. Come on. Let's backtrack. We wasted a good 5 minutes, but we learned where not to go. By the time evening arrived, Max was utterly spent, his reservoir of aggression and mischief dangerously low. He hadn't achieved his goal of making her quit. Worse, he hadn't even managed to make her angry. Every one of his carefully planned assaults had been met not with punishment, but with calm analysis, redirection, and genuine respect for his intelligence. He was used to adult irrationality. Eleanor was relentlessly rational, and it was the most disruptive force he had ever encountered. Mr. Hawthorne, a man who saw his son's behavior only through the lens of business failure, finally summoned Eleanor to his study late that evening. He was a man accustomed to firing people, and he was ready for the inevitable report of failure. Miss Vance, Mr. Hawthorne began, not bothering to look up from his financial reports, his tone crisp and dismissive. Henderson tells me Max had an unusually active day. I assume you're here to tender your notice. Don't worry, you'll be compensated for your time. Eleanor stood straight, her hands clasped calmly in front of her. On the contrary, Mr. Hawthorne, I'm here to tell you that Max is a deeply intelligent, highly creative child with exceptional engineering and artistic aptitude. Mr. Hawthorne finally lowered his report, his eyes narrowed in disbelief. Engineering? The boy smeared paint on a wall and tried to soak you with a bucket of water. That's not engineering, Miss Vance, that's malicious delinquency. No, sir, Eleanor gently corrected him. It's misdirected genius. The tripwire he set was perfectly taut and balanced. It required careful measurement and execution. His caricature of me, while inappropriate for a textbook, showed a natural understanding of portraiture. He's not being aggressive. He's testing his environment and specifically the boundaries of the people in it. He's looking for the one adult who won't break, who will not be provoked, and who will see him not as a problem to be solved, but as a person to be nurtured. Mr. Hawthorne leaned back in his leather chair, stunned into silence. No one had ever spoken to him about his son like this. They usually just complained about the damage and demanded a raise. He needs boundaries, not battles, Eleanor concluded. And he needs to know that my commitment to him is not conditional on his good behavior. It is absolute. He tested me with fire today, Mr. Hawthorne, and I simply refused to burn. The CEO of one of the world's largest corporations could only stare at his son's new caregiver, a woman who spoke of his troubled air with the quiet confidence of a seasoned general. He cleared his throat. And what do you need from me, Miss Vance? Eleanor finally allowed herself a small, determined smile. Nothing, sir. Just your leave to continue. I believe Max and I have a great deal of work to do. And tomorrow we're going to start with a sketchbook and a book on structural mechanics. He needs tools for his mind, not just for his mischief. She left the study, the heavy door closing silently behind her, leaving Mr. Hawthorne to stare at the spot where she had stood, a rare and troubling sense of hope stirring in the cold silence of his magnificent home. Meanwhile, Max, listening from the shadows of the hallway as he often did, heard her last words. Absolute. She was committed to him no matter what. He felt a profound, exhausting, and utterly foreign realization. His most powerful weapons, his pranks and his anger, had failed. And for the first time in a very long time he felt something other than rage, a fragile, terrifying sense of security. The third week of Eleanor Vance's tenure at the Hawthorne estate marked a decisive turning point, one noticeable not in a dramatic explosion, but in a subtle, pervasive quiet that finally settled over Max's wing. He hadn't stopped testing her, but the nature of his challenges had transformed. The aggressive booby traps and destructive pranks were replaced by sullen silence and intellectual defiance. He was now probing the limits of her patience and the depth of her knowledge, essentially demanding proof that she was worth his investment of trust. Eleanor met this new, quieter resistance with a strategic enthusiasm. Following her promise to Mr. Hawthorne, she started their days with structure. Instead of attempting to force Max into rote memorization or dry textbook reading, she linked every academic subject to his passion, structural engineering and mechanics. For history, she introduced him to the engineering marvels of ancient civilizations. "Max," she explained one morning, spreading large blueprints of the Roman aqueducts on his floor, "these are the blueprints for a system built 2,000 years ago. It required not just physics but incredible social organization. Why do you think the Roman Empire lasted so long? Because they built things to last." She then challenged him to design a modern water filtration system for the estate grounds, instantly turning a dull history lesson into a complex design problem. For mathematics, she didn't assign abstract problems. She had him calculate the load-bearing capacity of different materials using the complex formulas required to build his elaborate model city, which he'd begun sketching after her suggestion. "If your skyscraper is to be the tallest in the city, Max, your geometry and calculus need to be flawless. This isn't about a grade, it's about gravity," she told him, grounding abstract concepts in tangible high-stakes reality. This approach began to chip away at his intellectual defensiveness. Max had always been a solitary learner, devouring books on robotics and architecture in secret. Now he had a co-conspirator, someone who spoke the language of his obsessions and respected his innate genius. The more Eleanor guided him, the more he allowed himself to be guided. He found himself arguing with her, not out of anger but out of genuine intellectual engagement. They debated the merits of tensile strength versus compressive strength and the aerodynamic principles of his newest drone design. However, the intellectual connection was only one part of the equation. Max's true problem was emotional dysregulation. He still had flashes of volcanic anger, especially when a design failed or a calculation proved wrong. These moments were his most vulnerable, and they were the crucial test of Eleanor's dedication. One afternoon, a particularly complex balsa wood bridge Max had spent hours constructing snapped under the weight of a test mass. Max didn't just throw the pieces. He swept his entire drafting table clear, sending rulers, pencils, and his precious blueprints flying across the room. He retreated to the corner, his face contorted with frustrated rage, curled into a defensive, aggressive ball. Most caregivers would have reacted with shock, a sharp rebuke, or a demand to clean up the mess. Eleanor did none of these. She remained perfectly still, waiting for the worst of his physical outburst to subside. Then she walked slowly to the corner, not invading his space, but simply sitting on the floor a few feet away. She spoke softly, without judgment, referencing his favorite pastime. "Max, when a suspension bridge sways too much, what does an engineer do? Do they rage at the river and abandon the project?" Max was breathing heavily, his arms wrapped tightly around his knees. He refused to look at her. "No," Eleanor continued, answering her own question. "They don't. They go back to the blueprint. They analyze the stressors. They look at the point of failure. They redesign. They install a damper to absorb the shock." She paused, letting her words sink in. "You are your own magnificent structure, Max. And right now you have a stressor and your emotional damper is failing. That's okay. We just need to build a better one." She then introduced him to the concept of the emotional blueprint. She didn't use clinical jargon, she used the language of engineering. "When you feel that rage, that structural collapse coming," she explained gently, "that's your body giving you an early warning signal. That's the vibration before the bridge snaps. Instead of letting the whole thing fall apart, we practice a quick, controlled demolition. We breathe. We count. We name the feeling: frustration, anger, disappointment. We don't run from the feeling, we name the mechanism that failed." She taught him a technique she called the 5-second fix. A structured breathing exercise coupled with the mental task of visualizing a perfect, flawless structure. The goal wasn't to repress the anger, but to interrupt the aggression long enough to engage his rational mind. Max, initially resistant, found the engineering analogy compelling. He began to practice the breathing not because he was told to, but because he saw it as a new tool for self-control. Over the next week, Eleanor noticed small victories. Instead of throwing his pencil when a math problem stumped him, he would jam it down on the desk, let out a loud, frustrated exhale, and then immediately begin the 5-second breathing sequence. The aggression was still there, but the velocity of the outburst was slowing. The final, and perhaps most meaningful development was the growth of trust. Max started sharing things. Not just his ideas for a new solar-powered robot, but small, personal hurts. He mentioned how the other children at his exclusive private school only talked about their father's wealth, and how he felt like an outsider. He revealed his fear that his own father would send him away if he didn't stop being a menace. Eleanor listened to these confessions with the same steady, non-judgmental attention she gave his engineering schematics. She didn't offer platitudes. She offered anchors. "Max," she said gently, folding one of his blueprints, "your father has entrusted you to me. He is a busy man, but he is a man of his word. My job is to see you succeed, and my commitment is not temporary. You can trust me to be here, Max. Every day. You can build your life on that certainty." She looked him directly in the eye, her gaze a promise. "I am your load-bearing wall." That evening, as Max prepared for bed, he did something unprecedented. He hesitated at the door as Eleanor was leaving, then turned back. He walked to her, still looking at the floor, and quietly handed her the small, defaced textbook he'd ruined during his second test. "I tried to erase your drawing," he mumbled, "but it smudged the paper." Eleanor took the book, saw the smudged caricature of her face and smiled. "That's all right, Max. We'll just get a new book. But I'll keep this one." "Why?" he asked, genuinely confused. "Because," she said, tucking it into her bag, "it's a reminder of where we started. And it's a beautiful sketch of a person who never gave up on you." She placed a gentle, fleeting kiss on the top of his head, a rare act of physical affection in his sterile, polite world. Max stood watching her leave, the fragile seed of security she had planted now starting to take root, creating the first internal architecture of trust he had ever known. His world, once a battlefield, was slowly, painstakingly being remodeled into a home. The changes Eleanor had engineered within Max's private world began to manifest in his public life, specifically at the prestigious and fiercely competitive Atherton Academy. 4 years, Atherton had known Max Hawthorne only as the disruptive element, the problem child, whose wealth shielded him from expulsion. Now, thanks to the architecture of trust Eleanor had built, his innate intelligence was finally finding a productive outlet. Eleanor understood that Max's school problems stemmed from a deep-seated contempt for arbitrary authority and a curriculum that failed to engage his mechanical mind. She saw his academic defiance not as laziness, but as a frustrated cry for relevance. Her strategy was simple: amplify his strength to eclipse his weakness. His first major academic test under her guidance was the Atherton Science Fair. Max initially scoffed at the idea. "Science fairs are for nerds who build volcanoes, Miss Vance. I build things that move." "Then build something that changes the world, Max," Eleanor challenged him, her eyes sparkling. "Use your genius for a purpose." She suggested he tackle a real-world problem, the energy inefficiency of the Hawthorne estate. Max's eyes lit up. This was a challenge worthy of his intellect. Working late into the night, fueled by Eleanor's quiet encouragement and endless cups of herbal tea, Max developed a detailed, complex model for a kinetic energy harvesting system. A series of hidden floor panels and pressure plates designed to capture the energy of footsteps and convert it into usable electricity for the mansion's lighting. Eleanor didn't do the work for him, but she was his project manager, his sounding board, and his emotional stabilizer. When he became frustrated with the complex wiring, she didn't scold his impatience. She reminded him to use his 5-second fix, to pause, breathe, and name the frustration before continuing. Max learned that anger was not a tool, precision was. The presentation at Atherton was Max's first true public triumph. He stood next to his intricate, fully functional model, speaking not with his usual aggressive sneer, but with the focused passion of a true expert. He articulated the physics, the mechanics, and the economic benefits with stunning clarity. He handled the judge's skeptical questions with the poised confidence Eleanor had coached him on, presenting complex calculations on the fly. He didn't win the grand prize. Some teachers, old guard faculty who still remembered the old Max, had reservations. But he earned the special judge's commendation for technical innovation, a new award created solely because his project was so far beyond his peers. More important than the award was the social validation. For the first time, Max was approached by his classmates not with fear, but with genuine awe. The problem child was suddenly the genius. A small, shy boy named Ethan, the top math student, hesitantly approached him. "Your calculations on the torque were incredible, Max. Can you show me how you factored in the material elasticity?" Max, used to pushing people away, hesitated. Eleanor, standing nearby, offered a silent, encouraging nod. Max swallowed his apprehension. "Yes, sure," he said, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. "I had to adjust the Bernoulli principle for the friction coefficient." He had gained his first true friend, bonded by mutual respect for skill, not fear of aggression. Eleanor made sure to communicate these successes to Mr. Hawthorne. She didn't exaggerate the win, she focused on the process and the positive change in his behavior. Mr. Hawthorne, she reported during their brief weekly check-in, Max's project was remarkable. But the true success was his composure. He managed moments of high stress without aggression, and he handled the judge's toughest questions with the calm of an adult. He has found a way to channel his intensity. Mr. Hawthorne, who was accustomed to receiving calls from the school only when Max was in trouble, was momentarily speechless. He hadn't attended the fair, business called, but he had seen the official email from the headmaster, which spoke of Max's newfound focus and mature presentation style. I suppose that's good, Miss Vance, he replied stiffly, trying to process this unfamiliar sensation of paternal pride mixed with distance. He needs to maintain this. Max needs to be a winner. Eleanor seized the moment to address the deeper, familial dynamics. Max is a winner, sir. But he needs to know that his worth isn't only in his victories. He needs to know that his efforts and his growth are valued, especially by you. She gently pushed him to acknowledge Max's work directly. Could you perhaps take a few minutes this evening, Mr. Hawthorne, not to discuss business, but to simply ask him about the wiring? Ask him what his next project will be. Show him that his mind matters to you, not just his grades. That evening, a hesitant Mr. Hawthorne approached Max in his now organized workshop. He didn't know what to say, so he stammered out the only thing he could think of, words foreign to his usual transactional style. Max, your project, the headmaster mentioned it. It was apparently quite sophisticated. Max, who was happily sketching a new drone wing, froze. He looked up, expecting the usual critical edge. I was impressed by the energy calculations, Mr. Hawthorne continued, quoting a detail Eleanor had specifically told him to mention. The adjustment for the coefficient, that's complex. Good work. He managed a small, awkward nod. It was a small, stiff compliment, but to Max, it was the structural integrity for the whole building. His father, the man whose approval was the foundation of his entire self-worth, had seen and validated his effort, not just the outcome. Thanks, Dad, Max replied, his voice barely a whisper, a vulnerability he hadn't dared show before. He quickly returned to his sketching, but Eleanor, watching from the doorway, saw the slight involuntary lift of his chin and the renewed focus in his eyes. The external world had started to recognize the Max she knew, not the whirlwind of aggression but the budding engineering genius. His academic success and his first genuine friendship had been forged on the foundation of emotional control and intellectual respect that Eleanor had tirelessly laid. The aggressive little boy was yielding, slowly but surely, to the successful, respected young man he was meant to be. Max's journey from menace to model had just begun its public chapter. The success of the science fair and the fragile bond established with his father created a critical new phase for Max. He was no longer battling Eleanor. He was now navigating the turbulent waters of preteen social dynamics and the expectations that came with his family name and his newfound academic excellence. Eleanor knew that for the structure of trust they had built to truly endure, Max needed external anchors, genuine connections with peers. His friendship with Ethan, the shy, mathematically gifted boy, became the crucible for Max's continuing emotional development. Ethan was the antithesis of Max, timid, rule-abiding, and deeply sensitive. Max's naturally assertive, almost dominating personality occasionally clashed with Ethan's reserved nature, leading to the kind of subtle misunderstandings that had once sent Max spiraling into destructive rage. Eleanor's role shifted from direct intervention to social coaching. She used their engineering analogies to explain the complexities of human interaction. A friendship is like a dynamic structure, Max, she explained one afternoon when Max was frustrated because Ethan had canceled their after-school robotics session to go to a family event. It has moments of tension and compression. You can't control Ethan's schedule just like you can't control the wind. You can only control your reaction to the external force. Max, his jaw tight, muttered, "He's flaking. He's going to abandon me." The old fear of being discarded, the root of his aggression, was surfacing. Eleanor sat beside him, patiently. Let's look at the evidence. Has Ethan ever given you a reason to doubt his commitment to the robotics project? Or to you? No, Max admitted reluctantly. then your reaction is based on an old fear, Max, not the present reality. We don't punish the people who are here for the failures of the people who weren't. We apply the principle of charity to our friends. We assume the best reason for their actions, not the worst. It's about building redundancy in your social support system. Trust doesn't mean zero conflict. It means knowing you can survive the tension. This intellectual framing helped Max detach from his immediate, emotional reaction. He learned to send Ethan a calm, non-accusatory text. Bummer about robotics. Let me know when you're free next week. The simple act of deferring his emotional impulse paid dividends when Ethan responded quickly with genuine enthusiasm, suggesting a detailed makeup plan. Max experienced the immediate, positive feedback loop of mature communication. The next major challenge came from Max's peers. His success at the science fair had made him a target for the popular affluent clique at Atherton, led by a boy named Julian who was used to being the center of attention. Julian, deeply resentful of the attention Max was receiving, started circulating a cruel, subtle rumor that Eleanor Vance was not a certified caregiver but merely a desperate job seeker who had lied about her credentials, a calculated attack designed to target Max's most important emotional support. Max heard the rumor in the cafeteria. His initial, visceral reaction was pure, white-hot fury. He clenched his fists, the vibration of a full structural collapse threatening to overwhelm him. Julian saw the reaction and smirked, achieving exactly the aggressive outburst he desired. But Max, thanks to weeks of Eleanor's training, engaged his 5-second fix. He breathed, counted, and consciously named the mechanism: betrayal, injustice, rage. He did not punch Julian. He did not yell. Instead, he walked out of the cafeteria and went straight to Eleanor's office, his body trembling but his mind intact. "Julian is lying about you," he stated, his voice tight with controlled emotion. "He's telling everyone you're a fraud. He's trying to get you fired." Eleanor looked at Max, not with panic or offense, but with profound pride in his control. She reached out, placing a firm, stabilizing hand on his shoulder. "Thank you for telling me, Max. That was incredibly difficult and you handled it perfectly. You prioritized information over aggression." She didn't dismiss the rumor, nor did she escalate the situation. She used it as a real-world lesson in reputation management and ethics. "Max, rumors are like poorly constructed buildings," she said calmly. "They fall apart under scrutiny. They have no foundation. I have all my credentials. You know who I am." "Does Julian know that?" Max shook his head. "Then we don't fight him on his terms," Eleanor continued. "We don't engage the mudslinging. We simply present the unassailable facts." Eleanor's response was immediate and effective. She wrote a calm, concise email to the headmaster, CSNG Mr. Hawthorne, requesting a brief meeting to address unfounded social chatter regarding the professional integrity of the home staff. She included a notarized copy of her educational qualifications and professional certifications in the attachment. The headmaster, faced with the unassailable documentation and the powerful Mr. Hawthorne on the email thread, immediately addressed the matter, shutting down Julian's gossip before it could take root. Max witnessed the entire process: the calm, the strategic use of facts, and the non-aggressive assertion of integrity. He learned that true strength lies not in the loudest defense, but in the strongest foundation. That evening, Max opened up to Eleanor about his deepest fear: that he was fundamentally bad, and that his occasional flashes of anger proved he was beyond saving. "Max, everyone has stress points," Eleanor said, looking at him with deep compassion. "But you, my brilliant boy, are rebuilding yourself from the ground up. You didn't lash out at Julian. You came to me. That wasn't just controlling your anger, that was choosing trust. That is the strongest structure you have ever built. You are not defined by the old mess, Max. You are defined by the new architecture you are building inside yourself." In that moment, Max didn't just feel safe, he felt seen and validated. He was learning that his past aggression was not a permanent fault line, but simply a temporary structural flaw that could be reinforced and overcome. The aggressive, mischievous boy was fading, replaced by a self-aware, successful young man who was finally learning how to navigate the complex social blueprint of the world with integrity and grace. Max's 11th birthday arrived not with the usual chaos of his past, but with a quiet, anticipated excitement. Eleanor, understanding that Max valued intellectual challenge over lavish material gifts, had arranged for him to visit a high-security robotics lab belonging to one of Mr. Hawthorne's subsidiary companies, a gesture that thrilled Max far more than any new video game console ever could. However, the day was overshadowed by a disappointment that tested Max's newly formed emotional defenses far more than any prank or academic challenge ever had. Mr. Hawthorne cancelled. The CEO, citing an unavoidable, sudden acquisition negotiation in Asia, called from the jet just hours before the planned event. It was a familiar pattern. Business always trumped his son, but Max, who had allowed himself to hope after their positive interaction post-science fair, felt the rejection with profound, chilling clarity. When Max received the news from a weary Mr. Henderson, his face didn't crumple into a tantrum. It simply went blank, a terrifying absence of emotion. He walked straight to his workshop, not to destroy anything, but to silently dismantle his intricate model of the kinetic energy harvester, piece by slow, deliberate piece. Eleanor found him there, surrounded by the organized remnants of his hard work. She knew this was a moment that could either cement his progress or shatter it, sending him back to the aggressive isolation he had perfected. She didn't offer platitudes about his father's busy schedule. She didn't scold his dismantling of the model. Instead, she sat down on the floor beside the scattered pieces and began sorting them by material: balsa wood with balsa wood, copper wiring with copper wiring. "When we build structures, Max," she said softly, her voice carrying no judgment, "we have to account for external forces we can't control. A sudden earthquake, a flash flood. We build resilience into the design." Max finally spoke, his voice low and laced with pain. "He doesn't care, Miss Vance. The money always matters more than I do. I should have known." Eleanor stopped sorting and turned to face him fully. She didn't deny the pain of his observation, she validated it. "Max, your feelings are valid. This hurts. It's a profound disappointment. You invested hope and it wasn't met. That's a structural failure that has nothing to do with you and everything to do with a man who has misplaced his priorities." She then did something she had never done before. She shared a small piece of her own vulnerability. "When I was younger, I worked tirelessly for a scholarship that I was told was mine. I lost it at the last minute to someone with better connections. I was furious. I tore up every paper, every note, every idea I had worked on." She met his surprised gaze. "I felt exactly what you feel now, betrayed and foolish for having trusted the process. But Max, destroying the blueprint of your future because of a disappointment today only punishes you, not the person who caused the pain." She picked up a perfectly measured piece of balsa wood from the kinetic harvester model. "You built this with precision and genius. It is a testament to who you are becoming. Don't let his failure to show up erase your success." Instead of a replacement gift or a distraction, Eleanor offered him shared action and emotional labor. She helped him gently package the harvester model pieces, labeling them meticulously for a future rebuild. This act of preservation signaled that while the project was paused, the value of his work remained intact. That evening, Eleanor organized a small, quiet celebration. It wasn't extravagant, but it was anchored in Max's new life. Ethan came over and they worked on their collaborative drone project, fueled by Eleanor's perfectly baked chocolate cake. In a remarkable display of his growing empathy, Max paused during the cake cutting. He looked at Eleanor, whose quiet dedication had saved his day, and offered her the first, largest slice. "You're my family, Miss Vance," he said, his voice husky but sincere. "Thank you for not letting me break today." Eleanor's eyes softened, a rare, visible display of emotion. This was the moment their professional relationship solidified into something familial. She accepted the slice, her heart swelling with a mother's pride. "My pleasure, Max. Always." The incident had a lasting impact. Max didn't just survive the disappointment, he processed it and grew. He began to apply the lessons to his interactions with his father. When Mr. Hawthorne returned and offered a half-hearted apology and an overly expensive watch, Max didn't explode or pout. He used his new composure to state a boundary. "Thank you for the gift, Dad," Max said calmly, placing the watch back in the box. "But next time, I'd prefer a scheduled hour of your time to talk about my structural mechanics project, over any watch." Mr. Hawthorne, faced with his son's adult-like assertion, was taken aback. This was not the Max he knew. This Max was respectful but also assertive and self-possessed. He realized Eleanor wasn't just managing his son, she was forging him into a formidable young man. Max's newfound ability to regulate his emotions and assert his needs, rather than resort to aggression, earned him immense respect, both from his father and his peers. He had learned that vulnerability was not weakness, but a component of human resilience, and that the deepest bonds are formed not in times of ease, but when the external forces of disappointment are weathered together. Eleanor Vance, his caregiver, had become the stabilizer for his future, a quiet, powerful force that ensured his magnificent structure would never collapse. Max's 13th year marked his ascent from a brilliant but troubled child to an academically prodigious young man. Under Eleanor's mentorship, his performance at Atherton Academy wasn't just good, it was exceptional. The foundational work she had done, linking his emotional regulation to his intellectual output, resulted in a student who was not only mastering the curriculum but rewriting it with his innovative perspective. His primary focus remained the practical application of science and engineering. He leveraged his passion to address real-world problems. For his final major school project before high school, he designed and prototyped a low-cost, self-regulating ventilation system for older, densely packed city apartment buildings, a project inspired by conversations with Eleanor about the challenges faced by low-income communities. The project was a tour de force of Max's multidisciplinary skill, integrating complex thermodynamics, automated mechanical components, and a comprehensive economic model. It caught the attention of not just Atherton's faculty, but also a panel of independent researchers affiliated with a prestigious technical university. Max was awarded the inaugural Young Innovator Scholarship, a fully funded opportunity to spend the summer at the university's research lab, working alongside doctoral candidates to further develop his ventilation system. This was his first taste of professional high-stakes achievement, and it meant leaving the Hawthorne estate, and Eleanor's immediate proximity, for 3 entire months. The separation was a critical test of the independence and self-reliance Eleanor had meticulously built within him. Max, though excited, felt a familiar tremor of apprehension. He was used to her being his anchor, his immediate emotional stabilizer. "What if I run into a problem I can't solve?" he asked her the night before his departure, his voice betraying a rare flicker of doubt. "What if I lose my temper with one of the researchers? They're adults. They won't respond the way you do." Eleanor stood in his organized workshop, surveying the blueprints Max was leaving behind. She smiled, the quiet confidence in her eyes banishing his anxiety. "Max, you're an engineer. You don't panic when the structure sways, you consult the manual. I've given you the manual." She tapped her temple. "The manual is up here. It's the 5-second fix. It's the principle of charity. It's the process of analyzing the stressor, not running from it. The beauty of a strong structure is that it can stand on its own. You don't need me to hold up the walls anymore, my dear. You are the walls." Her words, framed in their familiar engineering metaphor, resonated deeply. He didn't need a constant presence. He needed the knowledge that the tools she gave him were effective and permanent. The university summer program was rigorous, demanding long hours and intense collaboration. It was in this environment that Max's transformation truly shone. When a complex circuit failed at 2 a.m., Max didn't shatter the equipment. He methodically consulted his notes, isolated the variable, and calmly began the repair process. When an older student condescendingly dismissed his low-cost design as too simplistic, Max didn't resort to a defensive outburst. He used the assertive communication Eleanor taught him. "The goal is not complexity," Max stated, his voice even and respectful. "It's optimal efficiency and accessibility. If your system can only be used by 1% of the population, it's a failed solution. My design sacrifices theoretical complexity for real-world impact." He was not just managing his aggression, he was leading with maturity. He earned the respect of his peers and mentors, not through inherited wealth, but through the integrity of his work and the poise of his character. Mr. Hawthorne, seeing his son's official progress reports, which now spoke of his unflappable focus and exceptional collaborative skills, found himself in a state of quiet astonishment. He called Eleanor not with questions about Max's bad behavior, but with an awkward attempt at praise. "Miss Vance, the university report, it's glowing. Truly. You've accomplished something remarkable. He's going to be a tremendous success. Thank you." Eleanor, always redirecting the focus back to Max, replied, "Thank Max, Mr. Hawthorne. He's the one doing the hard work of rebuilding himself." You just needed the right tools. I hope you tell him how proud you are when he returns.
Yes.
I will, Mr. Hawthorne promised, the unfamiliar commitment hanging in the air. Meanwhile, Eleanor spent her summer quietly managing the estate, but her dedication to Max never wavered. She meticulously followed his progress, reading every paper and email he sent, offering targeted feedback and encouragement. More importantly, she made sure his room was exactly as he liked it, tidy, stocked with the latest technical journals, a physical testament to the stable, unchanging anchor awaiting his return. When Max finally returned from the program, tanned, exhausted, and brimming with new knowledge, the first thing he did was bypass the waiting majordomo and search for Eleanor. He found her in the library, organizing his next semester's textbooks. He didn't need to ask permission or report his success. He simply hugged her, a tight, genuine adolescent hug that lasted several long seconds. "I did it, Miss Vance," he whispered into her shoulder, a profound sense of shared victory in his voice.
"I didn't break.
Not once." Eleanor held him just as tightly, her eyes shining with quiet tears of pride.
"Of course you didn't, Max. You were engineered for success. Now tell me everything."
Start with the torsional forces on the new hinge design. The aggressive, mischievous boy was fully gone. In his place stood a confident, emotionally resilient and deeply grateful young man, prepared to face the world, a testament to the unwavering kindness and quiet strength of the woman who had cared for him as her own. The most difficult chapters were behind them, the stage was set for his future. 10 years melted away, a decade defined by Max Hawthorne's meteoric rise and the quiet, unwavering presence of Eleanor Vance. The boy who once dismantled toys in a fit of rage was now 23, a graduate of MIT with a triple major in robotics, electrical engineering, and urban design. He wasn't just working, he was the disruptive force in the sustainable tech industry, running his own venture capital-backed firm dedicated to developing the low-cost, self-regulating systems he first designed as a teenager. Max's office wasn't in the austere Hawthorne Tower, it was in a light-filled, repurposed industrial building, a physical manifestation of his commitment to innovation and accessibility. His success was immense, but the core of his personality remained anchored by the lessons he learned during that critical year with Eleanor. He was demanding, focused, and intensely driven, but he led with respect, intellectual curiosity, and an empathy that distinguished him sharply from his business magnate father. He handled setbacks, the unavoidable structural failures of business, not with fury, but with the controlled, analytical approach Eleanor had taught him. The familial bond between Max and Eleanor had only deepened over the years. She had remained at the Hawthorne estate until Max left for college, maintaining her steady, grounding presence. She didn't fade into the background when he left. Instead, she became the trusted confidant he called before every major decision, a hiring, a partnership deal, or a moment of personal doubt. On the day he secured his first major round of funding, Max didn't call his father first. He called Eleanor, interrupting her quiet work in the estate's rose garden. "We did it, Miss Vance," he'd said, his voice brimming with emotion. "The validation system is complete. I signed the term sheet." Eleanor, her voice thick with pride, replied, "I never had a doubt, Max. The foundation was always solid. A home built on gratitude." True to the promise implicit in his transformation, Max never neglected Eleanor. As soon as his company was financially secure, he orchestrated a gesture that honored her dignity and her lifetime of dedication. Eleanor had always expressed a wish to move back to her vibrant, diverse neighborhood near the city center, a community she had missed during her years in the quiet isolation of the Hawthorne estate. Max didn't just buy her a house, he designed and built it himself. Using all the skills she had fostered, he crafted a perfect, sustainable sanctuary, a beautiful, sun-drenched row house incorporating his low-cost ventilation system, solar panels, and a small, carefully designed urban garden. He presented the house to her on her 65th birthday. Standing on the porch, Max looked at the proud, slightly tearful woman beside him, his success, his poise, and his very character a living testament to her influence. "This isn't payment, Miss Vance," Max said, his voice steady. "This is a structural integrity guarantee. You built the man I am today. You gave me the blueprint for self-control and the materials for success. This house is simply your well-deserved anchor." Eleanor, placing a hand on the solid oak banister Max had carved, turned to him. Max, my reward was watching you find peace. This," she gestured to the house, "is a beautiful, humbling display of your gratitude. The legacy of kindness." Mr. Hawthorne, now semi-retired and watching his son dominate the business world, finally understood the true value of Eleanor Vance. He saw how Max's emotional intelligence, his ability to build loyal teams and navigate complex human politics, made him a more effective and respected leader than he himself had ever been. Max made sure Eleanor remained an integral part of his life. She was a permanent fixture at all major family holidays, business celebrations, and even the launch of his first major philanthropic foundation, which focused on funding technical education for underserved youth, a direct reflection of Eleanor's emphasis on providing tools for the mind. Their relationship was defined by an easy, profound affection. Max, who had once recoiled from her touch, now often stopped by her row house simply for her company, to share a meal and debate the latest advancements in AI over a cup of tea. He still sought her advice, no longer on his temper, but on navigating the moral complexities of business. Max Hawthorne, the aggressive, mischievous boy, was now the successful, polite, and kind young man, a living symbol of the power of unconditional love and dedicated nurture. The story of Eleanor Vance was not just a story of a caregiver. It was the story of the enduring foundation upon which a great future was built, a structure that would last generation after generation, built not on concrete and steel, but on unbreakable kindness and profound gratitude. Dear viewer, if you've watched up to this point, thank you for your support. I have a small request. If you enjoy my stories, you can subscribe to the channel, and don't hesitate to share your thoughts about the stories in the comments. Enjoy watching. Thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video.